Give a short introduction, your current role, any teaching applications, any sort of experiences or what you teach as well. Go ahead.
Shelley Kurland. My job title is Dean of Virtual Campus at the County College of Morris. I set the expectations. We do training. I do a lot of work with third party, with vendors. We kind of communicate really across the board.
I'm Brittany Hochstetter, and I am a senior professor of communication at Wake Tech Community College in Raleigh, North Carolina. And I've been there for 15 years plus, and a few other colleges along the way as an adjunct instructor and temporary instructor before that. I've also been an administrative department chair, associate department chair, online lead, here and there. Motherhood is full time, and so that has been something that I've enjoyed having in my life, and being a working mom and educator at the same time.
Kelly Schellenberg. I serve as the Executive Dean for Innovation and Technology at Portland Community College. I've been in that role for about a year, but I've had about 27 years of experience in higher education, primarily through administration, and mostly focused with distance education, online learning, and academic technology. I also serve as a faculty member for the Instructional Technology Council's annual Distance Learning Leadership Academy. Primarily, I focus my teaching there around strength-based leadership and strategic direction.
In your position, I'm assuming you have two audiences, your students and your faculty and your administration. How would you describe those two different audiences? Are they very different? Are there similarities to them in terms of communication?
Every audience has its own context and its own moment. So just taking students, for example, the way I communicate with students online versus in person is different, and the way that I communicate with them now is different than even I communicated with them 5-10 years ago, just because of generational differences and technological differences, and the political climate, the pop cultural climate. So I think every audience has its unique setup. With students, I have transitioned more to a guide on the side, kind of facilitating their learning more than I did 15-20 years ago in education, where it was a little bit more of the sage on the stage kind of voice in their life. I use a lot more humor in my communication with them. I've noticed that they need and enjoy and appreciate a lot more encouragement. With faculty, especially your audience in higher ed, every group of faculty is different. Working with a group of faculty as part-timers has its own needs versus full-timers as well. But communicating with a group of faculty, I think it's really important to honor them and to really recruit them. And so communicating with them, when I stepped into my leadership role, I tried to do a lot of asking for their feedback, asking for their help, not apologizing for leadership decisions that I've made, but humbly moving into a role of, this is how I see this situation, and this is the course of action that I think is best for us at this time. And if you see it differently, I certainly invite you to have a conversation with me, and maybe I've missed something, and we can have a humble approach to leading faculty, because you're leading experts. And I think you have to have that sort of humility in how you lead them.
What modalities of communication do you use the most in your position? So are we talking email, we talking phones, we talking video conferences? What's kind of your breakdown on those items?
So I tend to be much more on email when I have to do formal, information, like the informal stuff, a lot of just Teams, because that's easier and quicker. Email, I tend to do I would say that's like 70% of what I do at work is that the email piece. But I also tend to like in person. So I walk to people's offices and just have a chat. And so I tend to do in person often too.
So at what point in a conversation or what topics do you find face to face, whether it's something like this or Teams, or go to that desk and have a conversation? What are some of the categories that you would say, nope, time to actually use our indoor voices and chat?
Yeah. So a lot of it, I find that I like to do that when a topic is complicated. You know, there's a lot of nuances where you know that it's just going to be a lot of back and forth with emails. Then the second one I love is the brainstorming, or at least the initial brainstorming. Like, because we'll do the asynchronous brainstorming like on Google, and but the initial, because I love the real time ideas back and forth, and you know, because that's a dynamic that you just can't really capture in asynchronous. Another one is just maybe talking through some, you know, perhaps some management pieces, you know, some operational pieces or some personnel pieces, or just me asking someone, it's like, you know, I'm running into this, you know, how did you handle it? Right. So that tend to help. So those are kind of more the categories that I just rather, you know, just go to, you know, to have a one-on-one with, or a small group with.
I think if my phone rings in my office, or even my cell phone for an actual phone call more than like once a week, it startles me, right? Just the phone is probably the last thing I use. I think it's really interesting because primarily I still work for an email-centric organization in an email-centric, I think, industry in higher education. We do a lot of communication by email. What we're really trying to do a lot more in my teams is, you know what, if it's just a really quick, I need to connect, like, let's just do a quick chat, instant message. I'm noticing that there are folks who are sending content in chat that really should be an email, not because, you know, it needs to have like, you know, you talk, I talk, you, but it's more that like, this is going to be a reference document. I'm going to need to come back and refer to it, or I'm going to need to transition it from email into a Word document or something. But like, wait, that shouldn't live in chat. So there's a lot of times I think people email when they should be chatting, but there's still also now folks that'll chat when they email. But then we also go and use like to just, you know, keep track of project status, like monday.com or other items where it's more of a project management board, but it's really great communication in terms of how are things going, so that if folks want to just know, I'm working on a certain project with my team, what's happening with another project, how is it connected? You know, you can link resource documentation. So I don't think that folks realize what powerful tools we have in terms of communication with some of the project management tools. A lot of those platforms, you can make them as formal or informal as you want, just like we were talking earlier, formal or informal with other means of communication. And then I would say probably in terms of just like meetings, I'm probably almost 50-50 between web conferencing, Zoom meetings, and just having meetings that are in person.
With students, my number one, you know, way to communicate with them is just sending course announcements that go through their email. That's my typical from me to them in mass way that I communicate. And I try to keep it that way. I tell them email is the best way to communicate with me. When I was leading faculty, we didn't have but maybe 2 or 3 face-to-face meetings per semester. So most of the time I was relying on email, and I would use a lot of handwritten notes or just encouraging notes that I would put in the intercampus mail at least once a semester, maybe twice a semester, because I just live by the fact that an empty mailbox is a sad mailbox. I think modality wise, I think we use a lot of face-to-face communication, a lot of email. I will say I'm a big fan of the phone too, particularly if it's a message that has any sort of complexity or emotion to it. If it's pretty complex, or if it has any kind of, well, this could go one way or the other kind of feel to it. I really like to pick up the phone because then I can hear what the other person is thinking, and I can feel like, okay, I can hear the disappointment, or I can hear that they're working through something, or I can respond better. There's in communication discipline, we call that richness.
What's kind of your preferred communication device? Let's see, email, video, audio.
So I find Zoom to be really cool, and I like Zoom with I tried their AI, some of their AI pieces. They
Mhm.
have the AI summary, awesome. Like it was
Okay.
really well done. So that to me, if you're kind of doing on a professional setting, I think that's actually a really great tool. For me, if you're just doing like communication, Teams, I love just from
Mhm.
the work. You can do a lot, and then you can do the filing, and like texting is always like so easy. Like, I also use WhatsApp. So we've
Mhm.
done that, especially communicating with people who, like, again, like, my coaching group right now, we have a WhatsApp group, and so we could communicate outside of here and continue to do that. And then with people who are international,
Mhm.
so I use WhatsApp, quite a bit.
With teaching, I use YouTube videos, and have used Yuja, if you're familiar with that, to help manage those video.
Mhm.
I use external video, and then videos of myself teaching.
Mhm.
I also use Padlet, Wakelet, H5P slides to make them a little bit more interactive.
Mhm.
I don't think I use any kind of newsletter type materials for students. I would have done that more like Pick to Chart
Okay.
or Canva type software when I was leading faculty. I do use Canva in my course just with design elements. I'm going to be adding some short podcast type content to my course this coming fall. I haven't done that as much. Mostly mine's been video versus audio.
We'll do like Zoom meetings like you and I are doing right now. Primarily it's email, or it is in person. Um, it's such an interesting challenge because, again, you want to make sure that you have the ability to maybe have for me, for example, recently we just, implemented some recommendations for having some strategies around, enhancing quality for remote instruction, right? So synchronous online instruction. You want to make sure you've got a way to have a conversation with folks, and if you can, ideally, like, have in person, so it can be, also establishing those really strong relationships and those just-in-time questions. You want to make sure you can connect with people broadly. So that might be also having web conferencing. You'll want to have documentation. So you may want to also say, hey, based on what I'm seeing in the chat, I want to have FAQs, and then you want to have some sort of formal reference document. And so when you want to do all of those components, you do need to make sure that you're thoughtful about when you're doing which, and for what purposes. And so I think that that's going to be really important to be thinking about. Not only are you using email, but how are you using email strategically? Are you making sure you've got a virtual office hours for just popping in with FAQ? But if you have that FAQ, how are you making sure you're documenting it? So it's definitely that intricate web of communication.
How long do you feel is a respectable amount of turnaround to respond to, let's say, a team member or a faculty or even a student that may come to your department for assistance? Is it all the same? Does it depend on, how they reached out to you, phone versus email? What's your thoughts on that?
So if I have something that it's time sensitive and I really need just my full concentration, that's what I do. I just minimize everything, and that's the only thing in my world. So Teams, unless it's in that kind of mode, Teams is pretty instantaneous.
Okay.
I make a practice of trying to reply to work emails in about 24 hours. And except for weekends, so obviously weekends it may take a little longer.
For me, I try to respond to students around 24 hours. If they are sending me a message on a holiday. I've had students, send me a message on Christmas Day and Christmas Eve, and
Yeah.
and then I might have a longer leash on some of those where I'm like, you can wait maybe
Yeah.
closer to 48 to 72 hours for a response
Yeah.
on some of those, because you know that you're writing on a holiday.
Yeah.
But especially if it is during the semester, during an active semester,
Mhm.
I am trying as best I can to respond to everybody within 24 hours, whether it's a student or faculty member.
Okay.
Something that I do sometimes is just respond and say, I've gotten your email and I appreciate your question, and I will be getting back to you
Mhm.
on this day or at this time. And so I've noticed that that's a good strategy for me and for them, because they know I've seen it. They can take a breath and know that they matter, and I'm getting back to them, and they know when. But also it's good for me because I know I've acknowledged them. They know that they're on my radar, but I've given myself a little leeway too, that I don't have to jump 10 feet in the air every time a student looks my direction. I can have family time, and I can have a little bit of boundaries on the weekend and when I'm not working. As a phone call, I think that has a little bit more immediacy to it for me, unless the message clearly makes it sound like it's not something super important.
I'm gonna have my thoughts are different depending on whether or not you're talking about in a course where you're an instructor versus if you're talking about communication with colleagues on a specific topic. And here's one of the things for me is really important, and I understand my response is going to get a lot of feelings, but I do feel very strongly that as a faculty member, if you're teaching in the online modality, you understand that comes with a different schedule than teaching an in-person class. It does. We know we have students who are in various time zones. We have students who are working, Monday to Friday, 8 to 5 jobs, swing shifts, parents. We understand, like, that's our starting point.
Mhm.
And therefore a student when I see on a syllabus, somebody says, I will respond between Monday to Friday between the hours of 8 and 4:30. This is when you can connect with me. I mean, that is, I think, representative of not understanding the communication needs of our students. So I do think, I'm not saying it has to be every 24 hours. That would be what I would recommend to everybody, because I think that that's realistic and respectful. I do think it's incredibly important that you have your communication times listed very clearly on your syllabus and that you actually do follow them. If you know you are going to have a limitation for availability on the weekends, make all of your assignments due on Thursdays and dedicate that time that you're going to have. Maybe instead of a 48-hour turnaround, you commit to a 24-hour turnaround right before some assignments are due. When it comes to email, I actually think that one of the things that I know folks that have there's a lot of research about not having your email open all the time, that it's good to have times that you are dedicated to checking your email. So for me, if you haven't responded in, a few hours, that's incredibly reasonable. People are working and they just might say, I check my email twice a day, and they haven't checked their email twice a day. I do think that especially in higher education professions, having a response that's between 24 to 48 hours is very appropriate. But I also do think that we have to make sure that we're taking a look at, I mean, there's amazing strategies from, how do you have a quick response versus, waiting until you've got a more thoughtful response. So sometimes waiting a little bit longer to have a more detailed and thoughtful response can actually be the best thing. Again, ideally, you give a quick, oh, thank you for your email. Let me get back to you.